This is Changemakers with Katie Gore, finding the right solutions for the affordable housing community.
I'm back with Changemakers Tanya, Dempsey, and Nicole Graham, the co-CEOs of CSG Advisors, an independent financial advisory firm that helps design, finance, and implement affordable housing, urban development, and economic development initiatives. In the first part, we discussed your collaborative partnership with the Women of Naro and the breakfast and the importance of giving more women opportunities in business. But now let's transition over to the incredible work that you're doing at CSG Advisors, which has closed over 100 projects, providing affordable housing for over 30,000 families. How remarkable is that, Tanya?
Thanks, Katie, for the question. We are super proud to have been able to accomplish all of this. We have an amazing team behind us that really we could not accomplish all of this without. So in case they're listening, they're awesome and we love them. Two, I think we were lucky to have been part of projects that were really kind of like pivotal to RAD and also Faircloth to RAD. Right. So we were the first transfer assistance project in the country. We were part of that transaction. And we were also part of the first Faircloth to RAD acquisition in the country. Part of the work that San Francisco and New York did with blending Section 18 and RAD before it was cool. We were able to be part of like all of those really, I think, key pivotal transactions. And that has kind of helped us be change makers in this space. So, Nicole and I have been working on Faircloth to RAD like for 5 years, right? And have been talking to the RAD office on how to activate things and how to utilize them, because we truly believe that the Faircloth to RAD, even though the vouchers are not at a super high level like the Section 8 vouchers, but they do provide new money. And anytime you get new money and you can combine that with existing money, you're able to serve more people, more families. And I think that's what gets us like super excited is the creative challenge and the puzzle of trying to figure out how to solve each of our agencies' needs, because they vary. We have big housing authorities, we have small housing authorities, we have housing authorities that are super savvy, housing authorities that are not. And, fundamentally, all of those issues are the same. It's just a matter of like moving the puzzle pieces and potentially cutting the puzzle pieces in order to make transactions work and to make it fit.
So, Tanya, you've been a cheerleader for Faircloth to RAD conversions for quite a while, like you mentioned. But for people who are listening, give the layman's definition or the 101 version of exactly what this is.
Wow. I don't know if there is one, but I'm gonna do my best. Basically, in 1999, Congress said no more public housing. But so in that case, housing authorities were disposing of units, and those units weren't actually going away. They were just essentially being held what we'll call like on the shelf. So they didn't exist, right? Because they were sold or demolished, but they were part of that cap on public housing units. What Faircloth to RAD is essentially saying is we can take the cap number and we're going to give you funding up to the cap. If you had a cap of 100 and over the last 10 to 15 years, you disposed of 10 or 15 of them, you would have some capacity left. What HUD is saying is we're going to take that capacity, allow you to put them in new transactions to activate. So I don't know if I did it justice, Nicole.
No, I think you totally did it justice.
I think that's good
okay.
Because that explains what has happened in policy, what you see with trying to preserve units, and then also this kind of development window that's been opening.
I would also just say, right, that one of the challenges of any Faircloth units is that the subsidy tends to not be great. Part of the reason that housing authorities haven't been building these units back is because the subsidy is just not high enough to do. So with the Faircloth to RAD, I think we're seeing a little bit more opportunity to make those deals work financially because we're able to leverage the capital fund portion, which was never available in just like a public housing development scenario.
Mm-hmm. That's a good clarification, Nicole. So what do you think is the current challenge here right now as public housing units are continuing along this repositioning continuum?
One of the things that we have been really focused on in the past several years is actually trying to work with our clients to see development partnerships in a new way. We work with a lot of housing authorities that do their own development. They serve as their self-developer. But we also work with a lot that work with third-party developers. And there's, lots of good reasons to do that. Having, worked with housing authorities now for quite a while, I think there has been a big focus as an industry in what is the split between the housing authority and the third-party developer, right? So if I have a developer fee of $1 million and I'm a housing authority, right, I want to get, 30% of that fee. And if I get 30%, then I feel good that I've negotiated well, right? And then there's another negotiation that happens on cash flow, right? And so if I get, maybe 25% of cash flow, then, maybe that's good. And another housing authority might get 50%. And so, I've heard at these various gatherings and, whether it's NARO or other sort of housing authority leader discussions, right, where we're talking about, it's like, what were you able to get from your developer, right? Is it 20%, 50%? And what we have realized sort of over, it has taken several years to get there, but what we realize is it's actually, that's all looking at the wrong thing. Because in reality, there are some deals that have the economic strength to give most of both the fee and the cash flow to the housing authority and still provide the developer with more than enough money. So those are transactions where, maybe it's Section 18, there are high FMRs, a rehab deal where there's not a ton of rehab and strong acquisition values. In that project, you have a high developer fee, you're going to have plenty of cash flow, and honestly, the developer, the third-party developer, shouldn't need that much of those two items, right? There are other deals that are super tight. Those are rad, and they have low rad rents, and they have, buildings with high rehab needs, and there isn't a lot of acquisition value because the rad rents are so low, right? And so those transactions, you are just scraping the barrel just to get the deal done. In that transaction, honestly, the developer might need 80, 90% of both the developer fee and the cash flow to do their job and to do what we're asking them to do. Developers play an incredibly important role in this process in public housing repositioning. But I think our approach as an industry just sort of needs to change, because what I have seen is both housing authority boards and, leaders end up getting really focused on in some cases, they're arguing for money that they really shouldn't get, right? The developer actually needs that money because if they don't get enough, the bare kind of minimum, they're not going to do a good job on your project. And they don't have the financial incentive during operations to keep performing. There is an art, I think, to how this is done. But at the same time, I see, frankly, a lot more transactions where, a housing authority is I got 30%, but it's 30% of so much money, right? That's leaving 70% of a huge return for a developer that, yes, they're performing a very valuable service, but that service is not worth what they're being paid. The number of millions of dollars that we see above and beyond what we think folks should really be generating has been really motivating to me personally, because this is part of our passion and our mission, right, is to make sure that the public investment is leveraged to the maximum amount possible. So that means if I'm a housing authority and I'm putting in subsidy, I'm putting in my land, I may be putting in capital dollars, for that investment, I am getting the absolute most out of it. So that money, it should either go to the housing authority or it should be going back into the project to provide, more improvements for the residents. But it should not, beyond a reasonable amount, it should not be going into the developer's pocket. That's sort of one of the things that we are trying to shift is what is the focus? And the focus shouldn't be on the split, in our opinion. It should be on what are the economics of the transaction and what do those economics dictate? It's very transaction specific.
I do have a question because I have a lot of housing authority staff that listen here to this podcast. And when do you think is the best time that they should bring you in to the conversation and to the deals? Because I'm sure you've got horror stories when it was way too late.
The beginning. I will tell you, there's some housing authorities, it should be really we consider these transactions not one-offs, but as part of an overall strategic decision, right? I think that's kind of like soup to nuts. If we know what the goals are of the housing authority, and they might vary, right? So I'll give a couple of examples. I have one housing authority that's I don't want to have to lay off my staff. They're small and they manage properties and they want to do development, but they're scared. And the reason why they're scared is because, right, to kind of Nicole's point, you hear these horror stories about people hiring third-party developers and then what happens to the housing authority? It kind of becomes a Section 8 administrator, right? And what happens to all that staff? You don't have any more money to support them. And that's really scary. So we would reposition those assets in a particular way if that's the objective. And then there are other housing authorities that are get me out of the public housing business as fast as possible. And that's because they don't want to manage these properties anymore. And they don't, right? So they're let's hire a developer, let's get out, we'll have a ground lease and call it a day. I think every housing agency is a unicorn, right? And so the earlier that we can help figure out how, as I said earlier, how all the pieces kind of fit together, the better the outcome for them. If you bring us in too late, then either they're, again, to Nicole's point, we want to be negotiating terms upfront. We want to be negotiating strategies upfront. For that same housing authority that I just referenced, we were able to hire a third-party developer who's not part of the management, the ownership structure. So the housing authority maintains long-term affordability and control of the asset. But they loaned one of their staff members, a property manager, to the housing authority. And we basically fund their salary for 5 years. And that person is responsible for helping train the rest of the staff on how to manage a tax credit deal. That is the best of both worlds because we're able to build capacity, we're able to build infrastructure, and we're able to keep the forward-facing relationships that the housing authorities are known for to the residents.
Tanya, you mentioned about maintaining ownership. And when I first got in this industry over 25, 26, something like that years ago, I actually worked at a housing authority and ran the public housing. We were one of the first Hope 6 grant sites. And in this short amount of time, housing authorities have gone completely along and changed now their developers, owners, agents, it's completely different than the way it used to be handled and managed. Do you see more housing authorities wanting to maintain that ownership, or is it evenly divided? What are you seeing out there?
I would say that most of the clients that we work with, they want to maintain ownership. They, if they're doing a tax credit project, they are very, protective of the right of first refusal and purchase option to maintain, long-term control of those projects, right? We're generally, structuring these with ground leases so that even though the buildings themselves essentially need to be owned by the tax credit partnership, in order to receive tax credit equity, that everything is keyed up and, programmed so that that's going back to the agency. That said, we have seen a couple places where that's not the case, But I would say that, in my experience, that's definitely the minority. We tend to favor the long-term ownership approach to protect the public interest, that is what we're all about.
You guys have such a unique ability to navigate the strategic planning and these real estate transactions, but yet you also get the public mission. So it's so amazing that you guys have that holistic view of what you're doing. I want to be able to tap into maybe a before and after. So is there something that stands out that you want to share with us?
Interesting question. I'm much more on the operation side, Katie. Obviously we do a lot of strategic planning, a lot of real estate transactions. So I'll tell you a story about a housing authority that we worked with, that it was their first time doing a tax credit, and we helped them develop it. We helped, structure their deal. It was a RAD blend with an MTW enhancement. It was a little bit complicated. It was 2 large towers. They added a connector in the middle. They were able to turn on more units, which they put their own project-based vouchers on. This was like right as Faircloth to RAD was coming into play. And I think they thought they were going to lose time if they did it. So they just added additional project-based vouchers. Now that happened and we closed that deal during COVID, like right as COVID hit. And today they closed and actually have completed a second project, which is a bunch of scattered sites with a 4% tax credit. And they are now leading a very robust development department. So the before was really just a capital planning project department. And now I think is an actual robust development with, their own subsidiary. So for me, what's super satisfying is to kind of watch the transition between, folks that are just managing a capital fund to folks that are really doing development well, understanding that development, able to manage their contractors, able to really just get it. To me, that's the most satisfying. And that agency to me is very successful. Although if you asked them, they would tell you they don't think they're very successful. They think they're still neophytes. But I think they're really the success story of how housing authorities can evolve in a way that kind of preserves their staff and allows their staff to build new skills.
Yeah, I like that, Tanya, because that is a really good way to really show how we've got to overcome some of these hurdles to get to this preservation and improvement of the stock, right?
Yeah.
So what about you, Nicole?
And it also kind of ties into what I love about that example, Tanya, is it also ties into we were talking earlier about just empowerment, right? And it's kind of funny because it's an agency as opposed to individuals, but sometimes it's empowering the agency to feel that self-confidence that they can do it on their own, right? So, Tanya and I often talk about how we sometimes work our way out of a job. We'll come in and we may start in a pretty intense role where, we might be training the board or working with the board, working with staff on how to do the type of development and transactions and look at all these funding sources and how do you evaluate and how do you negotiate with developers and financiers and everything. And we're playing that major role. And this is both for both self-developing and agencies that use third-party developers. We're doing the work, but we're also trying to, as we go, show them the way the whole time. We have several clients who have then as a result, kind of staffed up. We sort of help onboard staff and build capacity and provide that that expertise as they're maturing as an agency to a point where we don't need to be so involved. We often talk about we like to get to a place where they call us for hard. When they come up with something that they haven't, they're not quite sure how to handle, they call us and we're able to come in and help and provide that expertise. But honestly, those are the most satisfying, it's like personal growth, but as an agency, and it's this great evolution to watch, and that we've had the opportunity to see a few times, where we become less, I don't
relevant. Yeah,
they've launched necessarily, but it's like, what we actually want. This goes back to the mission, right? The mission is to build the affordable housing and to expand the affordable housing so that there are more units out there that are affordable to folks that need them, right? And we're still a small firm, so we're not going to be able to do it all, even with all of our, our colleagues and competitors, even the other consultants that we all work with that do the same thing. There just aren't enough of us, right? So we want the agencies themselves to feel empowered, and most importantly in that process, and this is where I get all worked up, is to do it in a way that preserves that long-term affordability, leverages their money to the maximum extent possible, retains control, provides the maximum quality of living housing for residents. That's the goal. I think you're maybe in your question looking for a specific project or something, and I have a hard time choosing favorites there. What I do know is that feeling of getting, whether it's a specific project where we've been able to go in and the authority has been able to finance all of the needed work, and sometimes even then some, right? That truly makes a difference in the day-to-day, because I know what it's like to come home after a hard day of work and you have kids that you need to feed and everything else, and where you live matters, and the amenities and the condition of your housing matters a lot. And it also matters a lot in what we're telling people, the message that we're sending to families about their worth, their feeling of being worthwhile, and their self-confidence. And these things are all very interrelated, and is why we do what we do.
It's a great experience to really move into that optimization component and just help housing authorities launch, but then really see all of this development come full turn, full fold, right? And just really into fruition. What a great opportunity for you guys to be in that space and achieve that preservation and improvement on such valuable housing, right?
Yeah, definitely. We're super passionate, I think, about it, right? And I think you can hear that, right? We could talk about this for forever. The Women's Breakfast, we are very, very passionate about affordable housing and about public housing in particular, because I think it's different, and I think the challenges it's really hard. So to be able to participate and to be successful and to watch people grow and to have those connections with people are really, it makes our jobs great.
You both have a great collaborative spirit. I appreciate your leadership and your role as co-CEOs and really running CSG Advisors and making such improvement into the industry. Tanya and Nicole, it has been a pleasure having you here and just chatting through all the unique dynamics in our industry. Thank you.
Katie, thank you so much for having us. Hopefully we'll see you soon.
Katie, it's absolutely our pleasure, and thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for listening to Changemakers with Katie Gore. To find out more about Katie, go to quadel.com. That's QUADEL.com. This has been a production of Forbes Books Radio.